Hey friends, welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to explore a short but powerful science fiction story called The Fun They Had by Isaac Asimov. This story will take us to the future, the year 2157, where schools are not like what we know today. Instead of human teachers, there are robot teachers. Kids don't go to school, they learn alone at home. But one day, two children discover something very strange, a real book from the past. And what they read inside makes them wonder if children in the olden days had more fun than they do now. So let's begin this journey and understand the message behind this story. In the year 2157, a girl named Margie writes in her diary. She is 11 years old. On that day, something special happened. Her friend Tommy, who is 13, found a very old book, but this book was not like the ones they read. It was not on a screen. It was made of paper. The pages were yellow and old. The words didn't move like they do on their computer books. They were printed and still. Margie was surprised. She had never seen a real book before. She asked Tommy, "Where did you find this?" Tommy said he found it in the attic of his house. The attic is like a small room at the top of a house where people keep old things. Both of them were very curious. They started to read the book together. It was about school, but not the kind of school they knew. It was about old schools where kids went to a building and learned together with other children. They had a human teacher. Margie couldn't believe it. A man? A real person teaching? She asked. To her, that sounded so strange. She thought about her own school. A small room in her house, with a robot teacher on a screen. She didn't like it much. Margie kept looking at the old book with great interest. She had never seen anything like it before. The words on the pages stayed in one place. They did not move the way words moved on her screen. She thought it was funny to read words that did not change. She wondered how people in the past could enjoy reading like this. Tommy told her that the book was about schools from a long time ago. Margie found that very strange. She asked, "Why would someone write about school?" She did not enjoy her own school, so she could not understand why anyone would want to read about it. Tommy explained that in the olden days, kids went to a special building to learn. All the children of the same age went to school together. They sat in a classroom and were taught by a human teacher. This teacher was a real person, not a machine. The teacher gave lessons, asked questions, and helped the children learn. Margie could not imagine such a thing. She thought a human could not be as smart as a machine. She believed her robot teacher knew everything. After all, it had been programmed with all the facts and information. Still, the idea of going to a school building with other children sounded exciting to her. It seemed more fun than sitting alone at home in a small room, learning by herself. She thought about her own lessons. Every day, at the same time, she had to sit in front of a screen. The robot teacher would give her tests and exercises. She had to do her homework and submit it through the machine. Margie remembered how her mother had called the county inspector last week. Something had gone wrong with her robot teacher. It was giving her tests that were too hard. The inspector came and opened the machine. He checked the wires and parts inside. Then he smiled and said, "It's not serious. The settings were just a little off. I've fixed it." Margie was a little disappointed. She had hoped the robot would be taken away for some time, but it was back and ready to teach her again. She did not like her robot teacher very much. It was always strict. It gave her too many tests. Sometimes it did not understand why she made mistakes. Could not explain things kindly like a real person. Now, reading about old schools, Margie started to think. Maybe those children had fun together. They learned the same things at the same time and helped each other. They could talk, laugh, and play during breaks. The teacher was a human being who could understand feelings. Margie thought about how lonely her own school felt. No friends. No fun. Just her and the machine. She looked at the old book again and slowly began to feel something new. A wish. A wish to know more about that kind of school. The one with real people and real joy. As Margie kept thinking about the old schools, more questions came into her mind. She wanted to know everything about how children learned in the past. She asked Tommy, "Did they really have a person as a teacher?" Tommy nodded and said yes. The book explained that teachers in those days were real men and women. They stood in front of the class and taught students by talking to them, using books, writing on blackboards, and asking questions. Margie was surprised again. She asked, "But how could a man teach so many children? Was he smart enough?" She believed machines were better because they had so much information. Tommy laughed and said, "Teachers didn't know everything, but they knew how to teach. They helped children understand things slowly, and they cared about their students." This was new for Margie. Her robot teacher never smiled. It never showed any feelings. It just gave lessons one after another with no break unless her mother allowed it. Margie wanted to know more about the classroom. Tommy explained that in the past all the children sat together in a big room. They sat in rows of desks, facing the teacher. The teacher gave the same lesson to all the children at the same time. If someone didn't understand, the teacher would explain it again. This made Margie think deeply. In her school, the robot gave lessons at her level. It was designed to fit her age and her learning speed. It didn't matter what others were learning. It only cared about her marks. She asked, "But how could all the children learn the same thing? They must have had different interests and levels." Tommy said, "Yes, maybe, but they learned together. That's what made it fun." Margie imagined a room full of children, some of them smiling, some raising their hands to ask questions, some writing in notebooks. She imagined a friendly teacher walking around, helping those who had doubts. It felt so different from her lonely room with a cold metal machine. She thought about how children in the past walked to school together. They played in the schoolyard. They laughed during lunch breaks. They had fun between lessons. School was not just about learning. It was also about being with others, talking, sharing, and growing together. Margie started to feel a little sad. She looked around at her own study room. There was no one to talk to. The walls were plain. The screen of her robot teacher was waiting for her. Her tests were ready. She touched the old book again. Its pages felt strange, but warm. She read the words slowly, trying to imagine the world they talked about. A world where children were not alone. Where teachers were not machines. In her heart, she began to feel jealous of the children from the past. She thought, maybe they didn't have fancy machines, but they had something better. They had each other. Margie didn't say anything to Tommy. She just kept reading the book, and her thoughts went deeper. A quiet wish started to grow inside her. A wish that she could go back in time, just once, to see that kind of school and maybe feel that kind of fun. Margie continued to read the old book with great interest. The more she read, the more she thought about how different things were in the past. In her world, school was something you did alone. But in the book, school was something people did together. This idea stayed in her mind. She had never thought of school as a place to enjoy. She began to imagine what it would be like to wake up in the morning and get ready to go outside for school. Instead of sitting in the same small room every day, she would walk to a building with other children. They would talk on the way, laugh, and maybe play before the first bell rang. That picture made her feel warm inside. In her time, Margie did not have to leave the house for school. Her classroom was just next to her bedroom. The robot teacher was always on time. It knew when she was late. It knew when she was not paying attention. And it never forgot to give her homework. She remembered how her mother was very strict about her studies. Her mother believed that children should learn at the right time every day. She believed that robot teachers were the best because they were always correct, always ready, and never made mistakes. But Margie was starting to feel that something was missing. The book told stories of children sitting in rows, listening to the teacher, opening their books together, and doing activities as a group. Sometimes they asked questions. Sometimes they made mistakes. But they learned together. Margie wondered what it felt like to ask a question and see other children have the same doubt. What it felt like to laugh when someone made a funny mistake, or to feel happy when someone clapped for your right answer. She thought about how quiet her lessons were. She could not talk during class. The robot teacher gave lessons and she had to listen. If she didn't understand, the robot would repeat the lesson, but it always sounded the same. The voice never changed. It never smiled. It never got excited. She read how in old schools sometimes the teacher would tell stories. Sometimes they would take the children outside to learn from nature. They had chalkboards and books made of paper. They did drawings and group work. Margie's robot teacher did none of that. It only showed words and pictures on the screen. It asked questions and gave marks. Margie had to write her answers in a slot, and the robot checked them quickly. But there was no fun in it. No one said, "Good job," with a smile. She also thought about how in old schools children made friends. They sat next to each other every day. They helped each other with problems. They shared lunch and games. They knew each other's names, birthdays, and dreams. Margie did not have many friends. Tommy was one of the few children she knew, and even he lived on another street. They didn't meet often. Most of the time, she was alone with her lessons. As she turned another page of the book, she felt a kind of sadness. She thought maybe the children in the past didn't have smart machines, but they had something better. They had joy, friendship, and kindness in learning. She did not say this out loud, but inside her heart, she felt something new. She felt that the future, her world, with all its technology, had lost something beautiful from the past. Something that could not be replaced by any machine. As Margie sat there with the book in her hands, she kept reading more about how schools used to be in the old days. She found it both strange and wonderful. The book said that the teacher was not only someone who gave lessons, but someone who also listened to the students. If a child did not understand something, the teacher would explain it again in a different way. The teacher could see if a student was feeling sad or confused and could change the way of teaching to help them. Margie's robot teacher could not do any of that. It only followed instructions. It gave the same lesson again and again in the same voice, using the same words. If Margie didn't understand something, the robot repeated it, but it never explained it in a new way. It didn't notice if Margie was tired, or bored, or just having a bad day. It never asked how she was feeling. She read that students in the old schools used to write their work by hand in notebooks. They used pencils and pens. They sometimes made mistakes and they would erase and try again. It took time, but it helped them learn better. Margie never used a pencil or a pen. She typed everything on a screen. If she made a mistake, the robot teacher told her the answer, and then she had to type it again. She also learned from the book that students had a timetable. They learned many different subjects like history, geography, maths, science, art, and sometimes even music and sports. Every subject had a different teacher. Each teacher had their own way of teaching. Some were funny, some were strict, but each one was a real person. Margie thought how interesting that would be. Every day would feel different. In her case, it was always the same robot, same room, and same way of teaching. Margie wondered how it would feel to be in a classroom full of other children. She imagined walking into a big room, hearing the noise of children talking and laughing, placing her books on a shared desk, and sitting beside someone who could become her friend. She imagined group projects, where students worked together and learned from each other. She thought about how the teacher in the past would ask a question to the whole class and how children would raise their hands and give answers. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong. But it did not matter. They were learning together. Sometimes the teacher told jokes or shared real-life stories to make lessons more fun. Margie also read that in the old days, children didn't always learn everything from textbooks. They went on trips to museums, parks, farms, and science fairs. They learned by seeing, touching, and doing. Learning was more than just reading and answering questions. It was about feeling, experiencing, and understanding the world. For Margie, this kind of learning felt like a dream. Her robot teacher never took her anywhere. Everything she learned was on a screen. Pictures and videos, facts and figures, questions and answers. But nothing real. Nothing alive. As she read on, Margie began to understand that school in the past was more than just studying. It was a place where life happened. Children laughed, played, made mistakes, grew, and learned together. The teacher was not just a machine giving out facts, but a guide, a helper, and sometimes even a friend. She looked around her quiet room again. The robot teacher was waiting to start her next lesson. Her mother would call her soon. The homework was still unfinished. But for now, Margie stayed with the book. It was not just a book anymore. It was a window into a world that she had never known. A world that now seemed full of color, feeling, and life. And even though she had never been to that kind of school, she felt something deep in her heart. A longing. A quiet wish that maybe, just maybe, school could be like that again. As Margie read more of the old book, her thoughts became deeper. She had never thought much about school before. For her, it was just something she had to do every day. She woke up, had breakfast, and sat down in front of her robot teacher. The same screen, the same voice, the same kind of lessons. Day after day. But now, after reading the book, her mind was filled with new pictures. Pictures of children sitting in a classroom, talking to each other, laughing together, helping one another with homework. She read about school bells that rang at the start and end of each class. Children would move from one classroom to another. They didn't sit in the same room the whole day like she did. Each classroom had something different. Different teachers, different decorations, and different lessons. There was movement and excitement. There was change. In Margie's world, everything stayed the same. Her classroom was always the same space, with the same white walls and the robot standing in the same corner. In the book, it also said that schools had playgrounds. Children ran, jumped, and played games during breaks. They made teams. They cheered for each other. They shared lunch, traded snacks, and told stories. There was noise, fun, and a feeling of being part of something. Margie had never played in a schoolyard. Her breaks were quiet. She might go to the kitchen, eat a snack alone, and then return to her room. There were no shared jokes, no loud laughter, no one saying, "Come play with us." She also read how sometimes teachers would understand when a student was having a hard time. Maybe the student was feeling sad or tired. In those moments, the teacher would speak gently, sometimes allow the student to take a short rest or even talk to them kindly. A human teacher had feelings. The robot teacher Margie had was not like that. If she didn't do her homework, it gave her lower marks. If she made a mistake, it pointed it out but never explained it softly or gave her time to think. It was always on time, always serious, and never smiled. As Margie thought about these things, she started to feel that learning in the old days was not only about reading and writing. It was also about growing as a person. Being with other children taught them how to listen, how to share, how to understand other people's feelings. It taught them kindness and teamwork. These were lessons that Margie had never learned in her own world of schooling. She was learning facts, yes. She could do sums and read history. But she was learning alone, without the joy that comes from being part of a group. She kept thinking about how those children must have waited for their favorite subject. Maybe some loved drawing, some loved stories, some loved science experiments. They probably talked about their favorite teachers or funny things that happened in class. School was not only about learning from books. It was also about learning from each other, from the people around them. And then Margie thought about her own life. She had Tommy, but even he didn't come to her house often. He had his own robot teacher, his own lessons. They talked now and then, but it wasn't the same as sitting together in class every day. She realized how lonely her school life really was. She never thought it was strange before, but now, after reading the book, it seemed very empty. The more she imagined those old schools, the more she wished she could go to one, not just for the building or the books, but for the people, for the chance to be with others, to learn with others, and to feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. The robot teacher might teach her how to add or subtract, but it could never teach her how to be human. That was something you learned by being around other people, by being with friends, by making mistakes and learning together. Margie closed the book for a moment and stared into space. Her heart felt heavy, and at the same time, full of wonder. A simple book had shown her a world that once existed, a world where school was filled with life, with friendship, with emotions, and with real learning. It made her think about what had been lost in the future she lived in. And once she saw that, she could not forget it. Margie sat quietly for a long time, thinking about the things she had read. The book was old, its pages yellow and the words strange, but the ideas in it were fresh and full of feeling. It had opened a door to the past, a past that now felt like a dream to her. She had never known that school could be such a warm and lively place. The more she thought about it, the more she felt a deep longing in her heart, a desire to be part of that world, even if just for one day. She began to think about her own learning again. Every day, her robot teacher gave her lessons at the same time. It was always there in front of her, a big screen built into the wall, with no face, no smile, no emotions. It asked her questions and marked her answers. If she made a mistake, it simply showed her the correct answer. If she didn't understand, it repeated the same thing again. It never changed its method, never noticed how she felt, and never asked her what she enjoyed. It was just doing its job. And then she remembered something else from the book. It said that in old schools, children were not all given the same lessons in the same way. Some children learned faster, some slower. Some were better at reading, others at drawing or singing, and the human teachers noticed that. They tried to help each child in a different way according to what the child needed. If someone didn't understand something, the teacher might give an example or a story to explain better. That made Margie think again about her own lessons. Her robot teacher never changed anything for her. It gave her what it was programmed to give. Nothing more, nothing less. She also thought about how school in the past had life inside it. Children used to bring things to show and tell. Maybe a shell they found at the beach or a story from their weekend. They asked questions not just to pass exams, but because they were curious. They laughed in class, made drawings, sang songs, and sometimes even made mistakes in front of everyone. But it was okay. It was part of growing up. It was part of learning together. Margie realized that she had never shared learning with someone. Sure, she had Tommy, but their lessons were separate. They didn't sit and learn together. They didn't talk about a topic deeply or work on something as a team. And that, she now understood, was something special about the schools of the past. Learning was not only about information. It was also about feelings, questions, wonder, and friendship. She remembered one line from the book that touched her deeply. It said, "The best part of school was being with other children." That line stayed in her mind. It made her realize something. In her time, school was lonely. It was quiet. It was just about finishing tasks. But in the old days, school was a part of life. A place where children not only studied but also lived a part of their childhood. They shared their joys and fears. They helped each other. They played, laughed, cried, and learned how to be human. Margie thought about the stories children must have told each other during lunch. About their parents, pets, dreams, or silly jokes. She imagined how they helped one another before a test or walked together after school. These were simple things, but they were full of meaning. They made learning warm and human. And suddenly, her lessons with the robot teacher felt cold and lifeless. She thought about how learning with others helped make ideas clearer. When someone explained something in a different way, it could help you understand better. When children worked together, they saw different ways to solve a problem. That kind of learning was missing in her life. Everything came from a machine. There was no discussion, no sharing, no teamwork. And then, Margie felt a kind of sadness. Not because she hated her lessons or because the robot was too strict, but because now she had seen another way, another kind of school that was full of life and warmth, a school that helped children grow, not just in knowledge but also in heart. That old book, dusty and forgotten, had given her something precious. It had given her a picture of what school could be. And now that she had seen that picture, her own school felt small and dull in comparison. She closed her eyes for a moment and imagined walking into a school full of laughter, noise, and faces. She saw herself with a group of children. sitting in a circle, learning together, talking freely, and feeling happy. It was just a dream, a picture in her mind, but it had touched something deep inside her. A feeling that learning was not only about machines and marks. It was also about people, places, and experiences. It was about being together, about growing up, not just getting smarter, but also kinder and wiser. Margie sat at her study desk, staring at the screen of her robot teacher, but her mind was far away. Her thoughts were still dancing around the pages of that old book. Even though the book had only a few pages and simple words, it had told her something very big. It had shown her a completely different world. A world where children went to a building together, met their friends every day, and learned side by side. That world now felt more exciting and more alive than anything she had ever known. The robot teacher started giving her a new lesson, something about arithmetic. It asked her to add fractions. But Margie wasn't paying attention. She slowly answered the questions, but her mind was still thinking about the old schools. She imagined wooden desks, blackboards, teachers writing with chalk, and children asking questions out loud. She imagined students passing notes, giggling, or getting scolded gently by a kind teacher. She could almost hear the bell ringing to start the day or to announce recess time. These sounds were missing in her life. In her world, there was only silence, her bedroom, and a machine that taught her like a robot, not like a human. She began to realize something else. The schools in the past were not just about learning math or history. They were about building relationships, about growing with others, and about becoming part of a group. Children in the past had memories of school that stayed with them forever. They had best friends from school. They remembered their teachers, their classroom fights, the joy of games, the fear of exams, and even the simple act of walking to school in the morning. These memories became stories they told as adults. But Margie knew that when she grew up, she would not have those stories. Her school was only a screen on the wall. There was no friend sitting next to her, no teacher's voice, no group laughter, just her and the machine. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something important was missing. Learning, she now understood, was more than just answering questions or getting marks. It was also about learning how to talk to others, how to listen, how to help, and how to understand feelings. A robot could teach her facts, but only people could teach her life. She thought again about Tommy. He was her only friend nearby, and they sometimes shared their lessons. But even with him, the connection was not the same as being in a classroom full of children. Tommy was now at his home in another room, studying with his own robot teacher. Their learning paths were different. Their lessons were separate. And that made Margie feel even more alone. She wondered why people had changed schools. Maybe they thought machines would teach better, faster, and more correctly. Maybe they believed that computers could make everything easier. But now she had doubts. Machines might be good for some things, but they couldn't give love. They couldn't understand feelings. They couldn't see when a child was sad or confused or happy. Only a real human teacher could do that. Only other students could make someone feel they were not alone. Margie didn't say any of this to anyone. She just kept thinking quietly. The book was now closed, but its thoughts were still open in her heart. It had planted a small hope inside her. A hope that maybe one day schools could be like that again. Or at least that learning could feel more human again. More real. She looked back at the robot teacher, still talking, still showing numbers and diagrams. She tried to listen. She tried to focus. But something inside her had changed. She had seen a better way. She had dreamed a better school. And maybe, just maybe, that dream would stay with her forever. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thanks for watching.